Thank you for being here. What a wonderful day. And I happen to be a registered conservative Republican, but at the same time, I'm a risk taker. 50 some years ago, I came to this town on a bus, and today it's turned into something like this, and that's capitalism and that's employment. I heard some people complimenting about our displays. Everybody's got brick and mortar displays. My best asset in our company is our people, and one of them is my partner, Jeff. Where are you? Jeff, raise your hand. Someplace, my son? Oh, he's far back here. He's already been to Peoria and back today picking up another piece of equipment for the shop. I'll tell you what, people want to know if we take risk, and you can be conservative and take risk. My taxes on this property every business day is approximately $1,000. Every business day, my marketing costs are about $1,000. Every business day, my light bill is just short of $500. So when we unlock that door in the morning, we're $2,500 down and we haven't paid anybody yet, okay? So I am a fiscal conservative, business conservative, but I will take risk, okay? So with that, I want to thank you for being here, and I'd like for you to stand as we make a pledge to the flag, the flag of the United States of America. I pledge to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I have somebody here who's going to make the major introductions, okay?
Thank you, Ralph. And I want to thank you for coming also. My name is Kevin McCarville, and I'm honored to serve as co-chair of the Linn County Pawlenty for President Committee. And to do our introduction of the governor, I'd like to introduce a familiar face to probably everybody in the room. Craig Paulson. Craig was first elected to the Iowa House District 35 in 2002, I believe. Rose up through the leadership ranks quite quickly and very deservedly so. He and his wife Kathy have 4 children. He's a native of Monticello, Kennedy High School graduate of 1983, which means I think I could have been his high school principal. Now that either means he's pretty young or I'm getting kind of old. He went on to undergraduate Iowa State University in Ames, MBA from Riddle Emory University, and Juris Doctorate from the University of Iowa. I'm not sure if that makes him a Cyclone fan or a Hawkeye fan. Maybe he'll explain that to us. But I think I speak on behalf of all of us in saying, Craig, we're appreciative of the leadership you provided, the great leadership this year during a real tough legislative session. Please welcome Speaker Craig Paulson.
First of all, I can clear that up. There's nothing I'd love more than to see the Cyclones go 11-1 this year. You know, I just want to make a couple remarks here, and then we'll get the governor talk, because that's who you came here to hear. But it's an exciting time, I think, to be in Iowa, and it's an exciting time to be a Republican in Iowa. I mean, first of all, we just finished a rather lengthy session, but I hope you're proud of your House Republican caucus. We stood firm and followed through on those things we said. And I see on the sign back there, and one of the things I also respect about the governor is it's about results and not rhetoric. You know, we talked a lot, we made a lot of promises, and you guys sent us to Des Moines to do very specific things. And we stood next to the Governor Branstad, and we stayed strong, and we ended up with the budget, in particular, a budget that spends 95% of total available revenue. Of ongoing revenue, last year with the Democrats in control, the House, Senate, and the governor's office, they spent $1.18 for every dollar that came in. We spent 97 cents for every dollar that came in, and we're pretty pleased about that. We also did a lot of other work with regard to job creation and different reform issues. And that's one of the things I wanted to mention about Governor Pawlenty. And I'm not going to talk a whole lot, and he can recite his resume better than I can, and I know he can describe what his vision is as he moves forward through this campaign better than I can. But one of the things when I've heard him speak, and one of the things that I've seen when he's been out and about and reading different things, is he's a guy who came up just city council member, if I remember right? Yeah, city council. I knew he worked at local government level. He was in Iowa, or the Minnesota House of Representatives. He was a majority leader, 2-term governor, and he was focused on taking conservative principles and looked at reforming government, reforming education, reforming healthcare. He applied those conservative principles, did it in a fiscally responsible manner, and he even found time to cut taxes in there. And in a state like Minnesota, I would guess you got a little bit of difficulty getting some of the colleagues on the other side of the aisle to go along, but he was successful in doing that. The last thing, I think it's great, and I really appreciate Ralph Palmer having us here at the RJ Center, because as most of you know, and I don't know if you know this, Governor, but this is where great ideas for your home come together. And I absolutely think one of the great ideas for every home in the United States would be to replace the current President of the United States. And with that, I give you Governor some quick
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for coming out today. And to Ralph, where did Ralph go? Back here. Thank you so much for your hospitality and for the jobs that you provide and the economic opportunity that you provide to this area, to this state and beyond. It's really appreciated, and you're an example of the kind of entrepreneurial spirit, the kind of investment, the kind of jobs, the kind of economic opportunity that we need more of across this whole country. And what Barack Obama doesn't understand is every time he puts another burden on somebody like Ralph, another tax, another regulation, another slowdown, another cost, he discourages Ralph, not just his business, but also his ability to provide jobs and that entrepreneurial spirit in America. Let's give Ralph a round of applause for his hospitality and for his leadership. I also want to thank Kevin, our leader of the Plenty for President Committee here locally, for that kind introduction, for his work and for his leadership. Speaker Paulson is a tremendous leader for Republicans and conservatives in this state. And just look at the difference from a few years ago to what he just described, and there are many measures of it. When you got the speaker and his team saying we're not going to spend more than 95% or so of the money coming in the door as compared to spending it over the cliff. That's a big change. Let's give the Republicans in the Iowa legislature a round of applause. So I'm continuing the work of getting introduced to the people of Iowa, better introduced and acquainted with the people of Iowa. This meeting here today is part of that process, and I've had this challenge before. When I was first running for governor back in Minnesota in 2001, I wasn't well known. It looked like an uphill battle. Jesse Ventura was the governor back then, and of course it wasn't clear when I started running whether he was going to run again for another term or not. And I threw my hat into the race, and it started kind of modestly. I flew around the state in a little plane, and a friend who was flying in, we bought him some gas and went to the local places, and you know, not many people showed up that first few days. We go to a rural airport and it'd be like one guy showed up, and the reporter, and then maybe the airport manager, and a dog would kind of walk through while I was giving my remarks. And so it was kind of a humbling beginning, but I was also coaching youth soccer that fall. So my daughters were in youth soccer, and I went down to the field that night when I got back from one of those trips, feeling a little discouraged, put on my coach's jersey and took off my suit, walked onto the field, and these little girls that I was coaching came running up to me. And they said, you know, are you running for governor? Are you running for governor? And I thought, wow, you know, this campaigning really works. I've only been at it 8 hours, and my message has already permeated the brains of these 6 or 7-year-old girls. And I kind of pridefully puffed up, and I said, yeah, I'm running for governor. And this one little girl, Kelly, I'll never forget, she looked up at me and she said, cool. Do you think you could get me Jesse Ventura's autograph? And the rest is history. But I'm enjoying the process of getting acquainted in Iowa, and we've got a campaign underway for President of the United States. And I'm running for President of the United States, this great country, because I love America, but it's in trouble. And I've got the skills and the experience and the record of results and the values and the belief system to lead it to a better place. And I look forward to the opportunity to continue this campaign. But I want to address a few issues that are very timely today in the news. And then we'll spend the rest of the time taking your questions and see what issues are on your mind. But if you woke up this morning, you saw another economic report that came out that was bad news for America. And what the report said was that the unemployment rate in this nation ticked back up again. And President Obama has been on the job now for the better part of 3 years, and he's not getting the job done. He went across this country, he made big promises to people, including here in Iowa, and he said he was going to get this country back on track. And he got into office and he said things like, you know what, if you continue me as president, or as I'm president my first term, I'll cut the deficit in half during my first term. Did he do that? No, he tripled it. Remember, he had that stimulus bill, and he and his administration said, you know, if you don't pass the stimulus bill, which turned out to be a pork-filled, ridiculous government sustenance bill, he said, if you don't pass the stimulus bill, the unemployment rate could go as high as 8%. It went up to 10%. This is clearly a president who has no understanding, no clue about what it takes to get our private market economy going. All he's focused on is growing the government. He wants to take things from the private economy and bring them into government. What we should be doing is taking things from government and bring them into the private economy. So I had enough of him and his fancy rhetoric and his broken promises. We've got to get the job done for the people of this country. We got nearly $4 a gallon gas. We got crushing levels of unemployment. We got a federal government that's out of control. And we have a president who, before he became president, didn't do anything. He was a community organizer. He was in the Senate long enough to have a cup of coffee before it got cold. And then we made him president of the United States. And then we wonder why it's not working out. And he's got a dangerous liberal agenda for this country, and we've got to get it back to a better place. Now, a 10-year-old figured this out better than the president yesterday. I was campaigning in Iowa, and Malin, who's a 10-year-old boy, I met him at a stop, and he asked me a question about taxes, and I gave him my answer, and then he gave me his views. I said, Malin, that's so good. Can you come to our next meeting and explain this to the group? He said, sure. So we put him up in front of a group like this at a town hall meeting, 10 years old. Picked him out of the crowd, by the way, because he was wearing an Adrian Peterson Minnesota Vikings jersey. And I gave him the microphone. I said, Malin, you know, what do we got to do with respect to taxes? And in his 10-year-old way, he said essentially this. He said, well, if you keep the taxes low or lower, then people will have more money, and then they'll buy more things, and then businesses will be busier, and then they'll hire more people, and then they'll have a job, and then they'll have money, and then they'll be able to buy things, and then the economy will get better. Now, we shouldn't have to have a 10-year-old school the President of the United States on what it takes to grow jobs in America. I went to Barack Obama's former place of employment, the University of Chicago, and gave the most detailed, most aggressive speech about what it's going to take to get this economy growing again. And I won't go through the whole thing, but here are the highlights. If you want to listen to the people who provide jobs about what it's going to take to grow jobs in this country, then let's do what they say. Let's not do what the bureaucrats and the politicians say. And what they say is this: get the government off my back. Now, every politician, including the Democrats and the president, run around the country and say they're pro-jobs. But you can't be pro-jobs and anti-business. That's like being pro-egg and anti-chicken. That doesn't work. And so we have a president who says he's for jobs too, but then he does things to weigh down, discourage, make the burdens heavier, make the process slower, and does the things that suffocate our entrepreneurs and our businesses in this country. And that's got to stop. So our plan was very different. And unlike President Obama, we actually have a real economic plan. All he has is a campaign plan. And our plan says take those business tax rates and cut them from 35% down to 15%. Cut them up more than half. But in exchange for that, let's then clean out all the special little deals and exemptions and credits and deductions that all these companies get. You know, so you got General Electric, the CEO, by the way, who's the head of the Obama economic policy. Guess what GE's corporate tax bill was last year? Zero. So here's what we want. We want a flatter, simpler, fairer tax system where everybody gets to compete on a level playing field, and your ability to be successful depends on your ability to connect with customers, not connect politically with your members of Congress. And we walk through the rest of it. On the individual tax code, reduce those tax brackets from 6 down to 2. Make sure that we have small businesses encouraged to participate in either system, whichever is more beneficial to them. And then we need to do something, which is to fix health care the right way, like we did in Minnesota. No individual mandates, no takeovers, market forces, and use that to get health care under control and repeal Obamacare in its entirety. And I won't go through it all in the interest of time, but I got a 3-word energy plan for our country. And as you talk to business leaders, they're concerned about the cost of energy. And if we want to get prices stable and declining for energy, we have to create more supply. So here's my energy plan in 3 words. More American energy. That means drilling in Anwar. That means more deep water drilling. That means learning the lessons of Japan, but advancing nuclear. That means using the 250-year supply of coal that we have in the United States, using the cleanest and best technologies that are available. That means going headlong as aggressively as we can into this tremendous game-changing opportunity we have for natural gas. They've now found enough natural gas within the territorial reach of the United States of America to supply the entire baseload energy needs of the country for at least 100 years. We should go get it, bring it to market, and use it. Like you, I'm sick of having our energy prices and our economic ups and downs partly dependent on what some dictator in the Middle East had for breakfast. You know, we got other work to do as well, and we got to get the federal financing under control. And you know this, but it's a very timely issue right now in Washington, D.C. as they debate the debt ceiling limit. By the way, it's also a timely issue in my home state of Minnesota. You might notice they got a government shutdown over these issues or similar issues in my state as well. So as President Obama and our Republican leaders meet this weekend to talk about this issue, I want to make sure that we weigh in and send our voices loud and clear to our Republican leaders. We want to make sure that any arrangement that's made, that any arrangement that might include tax increases or more spending or doesn't really fix the finances of our country is unacceptable, and they should tell the president, no way. We got to get about the business of getting the spending under control. So when I started the campaign, I came to Iowa and Des Moines and said, we got to tell the hard truths to people. We don't need to scare them, but we need to have leadership, and we need to tell them what the real issues are, and we need to make sure we put real solutions on the table. So it's not easy in Iowa when you're running for office to say, in the context of the deep budget hole that we've got, we're going to have to phase out the ethanol subsidies over time. We'll do it fairly, but we got to do it. And that's not just picking on ethanol. We got to look at all the subsidies and recognize that all this stuff is subsidized. And we're going to be fair. Let's look across all the whole playing field and say, again, we're going to have a flatter, simpler system. No more special deals or little deals for individual groups. And we got to get that spending under control. We went to Florida and talked to seniors and others, the next generation, about what it's really going to take to fix Social Security. We went to Wall Street and told those Wall Street bankers, you got to get your snout out of the trough of government because you got it in there deeper and longer than anybody else. And when I'm president, no more carve-outs, no more bailouts, no more handouts. That era is over. And then we went to Washington, D.C. and told the public employee unions, you can't be getting better pay and benefits than the people who are paying the bill. And so your pay and benefits have to be restructured and frozen. Now I want to share with you one last insight, and that's this. Every candidate for Republican president is going to come through town, and they're going to tell you many of the same things. Everybody's going to stand before you. If another candidate were standing here, they'd say, look, I'm for reducing spending. I'm for cutting taxes. I'm for pro-growth economic policies. I'm for market-based instead of government-based healthcare reform. I'm for school choice through accountability and measurements of outcomes and allowing people to choose for themselves what's best for them and their families. They're going to talk about being tough on terrorism. We'll all say that we're pro-life, and we are. We'll all say we're for traditional marriage, and we are, and down the list. So if you just look at the words of people, it's all going to sound pretty similar. So I think an important question for you, the voters of Iowa, conservative leaders of Iowa, is to ask some additional questions. And the answer isn't just, are the right words coming out of people's mouths? The question should be, have you done any of this? And so people are going to put the next president in the Oval Office. I think you want somebody who's actually been in charge of something, run a large public enterprise in a difficult or challenging environment under difficult circumstances, and has demonstrated the fortitude and the leadership to put his or her head down and shoulders down and drive it to conclusion. Because anybody can stand up here and flap their jaw and give a speech. We've had enough fancy speeches. We've had Barack Obama campaigning and being president for the better part of 3 years with all of his soaring rhetoric, with all of his broken promises, with all of his nonsense. I mean, he's like a manure spreader in a windstorm. The stuff is flying all over the place, and it's not pretty. Now we got to clean up the mess. But to do that, we need leaders who have got executive experience, who've got results. And so this isn't about rhetoric. This is about getting it done. And you look at my record in Minnesota. We took spending from historic highs to historic lows. We cut taxes net during my 8 years as governor, even though we had 2 big recessions. We were one of the first states in the nation to take on the teachers' unions and move schools from just seniority pay to offer performance pay statewide. We did public employee pension and benefit reform and restructuring before it was cool and popular. We did welfare reform and litigation reform and on down the list. Healthcare reform the right way. So when you look at these candidates, I ask you, just respectfully, to think not just about the words, think about the results. Think about the results, not the rhetoric. And Iowa's got a vaunted position in this process, and deservedly so. You've got the first in the nation caucus state, and it's a big responsibility, it's a big opportunity. And I look forward to fully participating in the Iowa straw poll and fully participating in the caucuses. But I think it's important for Iowa not to just be first, but to be right, to send the message that the person who wins Iowa is somebody who can really be the nominee, who can really beat Barack Obama, who can really be the President of the United States under the most historically difficult and challenging times. And we can't have folks who just flap their jaw and actually haven't done anything. We've had that as president. We need to move to make sure that we now fix the country. This won't be easy, but it's not complex. And if security were easy, everybody around the world would be secure, and they're not. You know, if prosperity were easy, everybody around the world would be prosperous, but they're not. And if freedom were easy, everybody around the world would be free, but they're not. But we in the United States are, because we understand this. The brilliance of our country does not reside in our government or our bureaucracy. The strength and brilliance and beauty of this country resides in the spirit and soul and strength of the American people. And when government comes into our lives and makes it so difficult, so slow, so discouraging, and they elbow us aside in so many ways and tell us we can't do it, or it's going to be more expensive, or it's going to be slower or more difficult, they not only grow their footprint, they not only grow their budgets, but they do something else that's equally corrosive, maybe more corrosive. They begin to diminish and discourage the American spirit. And we now have a bunch of people in the country who understandably wonder whether America's best days are in front of us or behind us. There was a survey recently that showed that a plurality of people answering the survey thought that China was going to be the greatest country in the world within 20 years, not America. And they weren't asking the Chinese, and they weren't asking the Europeans, they were asking us. That's not the American way. We need to be and should be and will be the greatest nation the world's ever known. But we need leaders who believe that, who don't run around the world apologizing for America, who understand what made this country great, which was the industriousness and responsibility and creativity and hard work and generosity and kindness of the people, not the bureaucracy. We're not for big centralized systems, we're for freedom. Our current president doesn't understand that. He has just a fundamentally different worldview and philosophy on these matters. He had his chance. He needs to go. And we need a president who's going to get this country back on track. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take your questions. I just yell them out and I'll repeat them. Sir, go ahead.
I like what I heard how you feel the financial situation. But you mentioned
Right. For those who couldn't hear, the question was related to immigration. There's lots of issues, obviously, we didn't cover because I know I don't want to keep you here all weekend, but I encourage any questions on any topic, feel free. The immigration issue is really important. And we're a country, I always go back to first principles. We're a country based on the rule of law. And if the rule is anything goes, pretty soon it does. And if you don't believe me, go back in your memory to pre-Giuliani New York. And when you had a culture or an environment there where the rule pretty much was anything goes, or at least was moving in that direction. And it did. And so we have a country now where we have massive numbers of people openly, flagrantly, knowingly violating the law. That can't be the case. We got to make sure that the law in this country is respected and enforced. As it relates to immigration, it is not. Now, we should celebrate legal immigration, and it needs to be reasonable and orderly, but that's not what we have now. We got a big mess on our hands. So here's what we do. Number one, enforce the border. That's not just an immigration issue, it's a security issue. And again, like all these issues, people are going to talk, but I've actually done it. When President Bush called and said, are there governors who will volunteer to send their National Guard troops to the Arizona border to reinforce the border militarily as part of Operation Jumpstart? There's only a few governors who did. I did. I think I was the first one to do it. And guess what? It worked. It helped. So we got work to do as it relates to drones and satellites and personnel and border security personnel, barriers, and if the federal government won't do their job to make our borders secure, then let the states do it, because they will. They will. Number two, we got to shut off the magnet of why they're coming. And so what's the magnet for why they're coming? They wanted jobs, or in some cases, public benefits, right? And so what's the system now? Sir, what's your name? Sorry, catching you right during your Larry. So let's say Larry's the employer and I want a job. I say, hey, Larry, here's my Guatemalan birth certificate or my Honduran passport. Larry says, thanks. He brings out an I-9 form. He checks the box that I gave him those documents. He photocopies them, throws them in his file. He's met his legal obligation, Larry has. I seemingly have met mine. But what do we know about that system? It's a 1950s paper-based system now filled with fraud. We need an accurate, easy-to-use, non-burdensome verification system that tells employers and the public benefit systems whether somebody's here legally or not. And guess what? Now nobody checks. So when I was governor, I said, if you want to do business with the state, or you're a subcontractor with the state, you got to use E-Verify. And the legislature wouldn't pass it, so I issued an executive order doing it anyhow. And then we went on from there and said, look, not half, but a good chunk of the people who are here illegally are people who come here legally to begin with, then they overstay their visa. So I asked the legislature to put the expiration date of people's visas right on their driver's license. So if they get pulled over or involved in anything, law enforcement can see right away whether they're here legally or not, or at least whether it's an issue. Legislature, Democrats wouldn't do it. I issued an executive order doing it anyhow. We got it done, and then we went down the list. And so, again, these are all important issues, but don't just look at what people say. I did it. And as it relates to public benefits, if you go to the Hennepin County Medical Center or most of the hospitals in Minnesota, I'm sure it's true here in Iowa, you're not supposed to get public benefits, whether it's medical or welfare or the like, unless you're a pregnant woman. There's some exceptions for pregnant women. But guess what? Nobody checks. Nobody ever asks. Nobody ever looks into it. And we can't ask our local hospitals or hardware stores to go conduct an international investigation in Honduras over whether somebody's birth certificate's accurate or not. But we got to give them an easy-to-use, quick, accurate system to check it out. And if we do those two things, you will dry up most of the illegal immigration in a big hurry. Yes, sir.
I think we all agree that robust economic growth solves U.S. population problems. And you've suggested you want to do 5% growth.
Right.
3.5% has been the long-term average. There's been periods of 5% for a year or two. If you can get a long 5-10 year period of 5% growth.
It's a great question. The gentleman was asking, in our economic plan that I referenced earlier, we said, let's set a growth target. And let's make it a stretch goal. Let's make it bold. Let's make it courageous, and let's make it 5%. And you're correctly observing that the historical average has been lower than that. Now, we've achieved 5% at times. Post Jimmy Carter and the Ronald Reagan era, they hit 5% for a time. In one year, they had 7%, and the beginning of the recovery, that's the kind of recovery he had under Ronald Reagan. Bill Clinton got nearly 5% for a few years in the 90s. So is it an aggressive goal? Absolutely. We've taken some criticism from the left because they don't think it's realistic. But Larry Kudlow and John Taylor and Steve Forbes and a variety of other conservative economists have said, yeah, you can do this. Now, is it stretch? But, you know, when Kennedy said, let's have a space program, he didn't say, let's go to the clouds or let's maybe try to get to the atmosphere. He said, let's go to the moon. And it's not only something that we hope can happen, it really is needed to happen. If we're going to have any ability to get out of this financial hole that we're in, we need big time growth. And I think we can get there, but it's going to take the whole package that we unveiled to get there. But, you know, look, even 4% would be dramatically better than the pathetic, anemic, almost non-existent growth we have now. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Yes. What are your thoughts pertaining to abortion and Planned Parenthood?
Thank you. The question was, what are my thoughts relating to abortion and then also Planned Parenthood? You know, the National Review Online, which is a conservative magazine, wrote an article about the 2012 candidates, and one of the articles said that of the people based not again on words but on results, that I'm probably the most pro-life candidate in the race. So when I was governor of Minnesota, again, everybody's going to say they're pro-life, but I was governor for 8 years, majority leader for 4, and the legislature before that, and the Minnesota Citizens Concerned for Life, which is the major pro-life group in Minnesota, gives me extremely high marks for my work in the legislature and governor. And included these things. I proposed and passed into law or signed into law the Women's Right to Know Act, also signed the Positive Alternatives to Abortion Act, proposed it, and then also the Fetal Pain Act. I think Roe versus Wade was wrongly decided. As to Planned Parenthood or other groups, I don't think taxpayer money should be used to be given to places that provide abortion. Sir.
One of the areas that I feel that you've been haven't covered yet, and I think our current administration has been such a disaster in, is foreign policy.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have a president going over and bowing down to some Saudi prince or something like that.
Great question. The gentleman asked about foreign policy and in particular President Obama's performance. If I could just jump back for 1 second, additionally on the pro-life issue and other related issues, one aspect of how we're going to effectuate change is to get conservatives appointed to the Supreme Court. And again, everybody's going to say they did it. I actually did it. So for the first time in the modern, if not the whole history of the state of Minnesota, we have a majority of conservative justices on the Minnesota Supreme Court. And when I appointed the Chief Justice before the one we have now, that Chief Justice was one of the lead lawyers for Lawyers for Life in Minnesota. And our rule was no ninnies on the court. We want to make sure that we have strict constructionists on the court, that they apply the law as written. And when you have a situation where judges or justices think the law is unclear, I want them to have the restraint and the humility to say, you know, it's not my place to insert my personal political views or philosophy into that space. That ambiguity, if it's going to be addressed, should be addressed by the people and their legislators or their members of Congress and their governor and their president, not to have some person with a black robe say, well, the law's unclear and here's what I think, so I'm going to insert it in there. So those are the kind of justices we don't want, and I want to put strict constructions. Sir, on foreign policy, again, another example of trying to lean forward on these issues. I gave a speech on foreign policy to the Foreign Affairs Council in New York last week. It's focused on the Middle East. It's on our website, and it goes through in great length views about foreign policy, particularly as it relates to the Middle East. But a couple of basic themes that would guide me as president. Number one, you may have learned this in a bar. You may have learned this in sports. You may have learned it in business. You may have learned it in some other walk of life. But it's always true. When you're dealing with thugs and bullies, they understand primarily one thing. Thugs and bullies understand strength. They don't understand or respect weakness. And so the United States of America, when it projects its security interests here and around the world, needs to do so with clarity, needs to do so with strength, and we need to have a president who is proud of America, believes it's exceptional, and doesn't go around the world apologizing and saying we're one of many equals. We're not. And a few things under the hood of that, you know, and these are just examples, but we also have to have a president who treats our friends and allies with respect and support. And one of our best friends and allies in the world is Israel. And we now have a president who purposely and repeatedly sticks his thumb in the eye at Israel. It not only hurts our friendship and relationship with them, it undermines their security, it undermines our security, and we should stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel. There should be no daylight between us and them. And as you know, there's also a debate in the Republican Party, and this is an area where the candidates do have some differences. And this has been in the blogs and the public, publications and the like. But we've got one party in the world already, or one party in America, dedicated to isolationism, retreat, and the like. We don't need another one. So in my view, the Republican Party needs to be a party that continues to make sure our military budget and capability is so strong that nobody in the world dare challenge us. That's number one. And number two, once we make a mission decision, the rule can't be, we go to war and then aren't successful. The rule needs to be when America goes to war, America wins. So you notice the president's speech about the withdrawal in Afghanistan. He said, we want to end the situation there, quote unquote, responsibly. Well, I want it to end successfully. Now, that doesn't mean we stay forever. That doesn't mean we engage in nation building in Afghanistan. But when you have General Petraeus and Admiral Mullen, two of the most seasoned and informed people about these matters in the country, in the world, in General Petraeus' case, the most effective general in the modern history of the country, saying, we needed just a little more time at a little higher level to achieve what he thought was the next security goal in the country and then begin the wind down from the surge levels. The president should have, I think, adopted that approach. Instead, he now has a withdrawal, which we are going to withdraw over time, but it needs to be based on real objectives and not a political schedule. So he gives this big speech, and guess what? The withdrawal timelines look a lot like next year's election timetable. And this isn't the first time he's politicized these decisions. We need a commander-in-chief, not a campaigner-in-chief. Let's go back to the young guy with the soccer shirt on.
You're talking about healthcare reform, education reform, difficult state issues. So, federal government being involved in it.
That's a great question. The gentleman referred to the 10th Amendment. We haven't had a great debate in the country since Ronald Reagan was president about federalism, which is another word for the proper relationship between the federal and state and local units of government. The Democrats, the liberals, believe in centralization. They believe that if you have a problem, drag it into Washington, D.C. The healthcare debate's a perfect example of this. What's their view? Well, take it into Washington, D.C., create a top-down command and control system, begin to limit people's options to one or a few, create a bureaucracy, have the government employees who are unionized staff it and to be part of the bureaucracy, tax us all more to pay for it, and put it on a pathway to be in financial insolvency within 15 years. That's Obamacare in a nutshell. And it's also a good description of almost everything else they want to do. That's not what we believe. We believe in the devolution of power from the federal government to the states, to the local units of government, but really to the people. And so I agree with you that every issue that we possibly can, and the 10th Amendment's been trampled by the courts and by politicians, what it says is those responsibilities and rights not explicitly given to the federal government are supposed to be reserved to the states. And the federal government has so far taken that over that the 10th Amendment has become almost unrecognizable, and we should bring it back into focus and push as many of these issues to the states. I'd go one step further. On education, we shouldn't be viewing it as a federal state issue. We should be viewing it as a parent issue. And your ability I've had enough of government systems that are one-size-fits-all government-run monopolies that treat people like factory lines. I would rather have an iPad as a metaphor for the kind of markets we want going forward. People get to choose what they want, what's best for them. It's customized to them in a manner that they want, where they want it, when they want it, and the freedom to choose. So Barack Obama and his Democratic friends stand before the country and they say they're the party for the poor, they're the party for the disadvantaged. Well, the best thing they could do for the poor is to make sure they have an education or skill to allow people to access the economy of today and tomorrow. And you know what they did when they went to Washington, D.C.? One of the first things they did when they had the Congress all Democrat, Barack Obama was new in the presidency, they eliminated the scholarships for poor children who could have escaped the decrepit, awful Washington, D.C. school district, and then they had the hypocrisy to send their kids to the private school. And the rule shouldn't be if you're wealthy, you get to escape the government system. The rule should be everybody gets a chance to have the freedom to choose what's best for them and their family. And that, yeah, absolutely. So that's the kind of thing I'm looking for, more choice. If people want government schools, that's their choice. If they want charter schools, great. If they want homeschooling, fantastic. If they want online learning, that's up to them. If they want to have open enrollment so they can go to a different government school in a different district that's not in their boundaries, your future shouldn't depend on what zip code you were born in or whether your mom and dad got a trust fund or they're a hedge fund manager. Everybody should be able to have their choice as to where they're going to go to school. Ma'am.
I had my grade school, my high school, my college before there was ever a department of education. But I'm interested in the EPA. I've lived in Oregon for almost 60 years, and it is taken over Oregon, well in California too. But like Bill Clinton, the key thing, there cannot be another single tree cut on the 6 million acres of federal timber in Oregon. This last year, the Dean of School of Forestry and some forestry said that the forests of Oregon are becoming very sick because there are too many trees going through, there's insects, there's diseases, and everything else. Now, they're ruling by, I guess,